Hi, everyone. We're now moving on to the 14th chapter. So we are going to be covering the first 15 chapters of the text in our recordings and also for our quizzes and our test. So we're near the end here, and we're looking at bureaucracy today. And what we'll focus on with bureaucracy would be the power and responsibilities of bureaucracy. All right, so chapter 14, the power and responsibility of bureaucracy. And primarily what we'll be looking over in this recording is just talking about some of the ways in which we can see this power and responsibility of bureaucracy. And the first example will be to look at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. So we've covered the different cabinet posts. We've talked about them to some degree and looked at the different agencies, consider that there's agencies within these different departments. So we get a sense of just how powerful the Department of Homeland Security can be. And we can also then consider how FEMA would be used. In this picture, you can see all of these temporary housing devices that would be available to people in an emergency, different trailers that could be used. Now, I say temporary, it might mean that people are living in these for several months because of the devastation in some parts of the country. So in a way, when we think about the responsibilities of FEMA, we can get a sense that while it's very important, you can also start to understand that it may not necessarily always be popular because of its overall responsibility. So you can see here its responsibility to coordinate the response to a disaster that has occurred in the United States and then overwhelms the resources of local and state authorities. So we get an idea right there that when FEMA is called in, it's a bad situation. It overwhelms the resources of local and state authorities. It's a disaster. And so it's very helpful to have FEMA, but it also lets us know that if you're working for FEMA, you're probably oftentimes, while you're appreciated at first, after a while you might be resented and there might just be frustration because you've been put in a very difficult situation. We can also see, of course, that there are bureaucratic organizations during the time of war. And I do think this is interesting to note. When we look at the military, it is a bureaucracy. And for some of you that have been in the military or you have family members that have been in the military, you certainly understand that, right? That bureaucracy can be, in many ways, a negative term, and there's all kinds of regulations in the military. So this particular feature that we're looking at here deals with the United States Marine Corps. The Marine Corps is part of the Department of the Navy. And think about the versatility of the Navy. Because of the Marine Corps, the Navy has ground troops. And so these are troops that are primarily what they've been historically used for is to guard beaches and ports and to guard captains on board ships, be in charge of the brig on a ship, which is like the prison. That's traditionally what they've done. That some of those responsibilities may not exist today. But as a result of having ground troops, the Navy now has air wing, has, of course, ships, and it has ground troops. So even when you have a military effort in a landlocked country, meaning no coastline, like Afghanistan, the Navy has a part in that war because of the Marine Corps. So the Marine Corps was called in to take over this island in the end of World War II. So this is February, as you can see, 1945. And this is then a war that will end in the Pacific in August. And so it's near the end of this war. So the idea here was to take over this island and then open up airstrips that you could now land bombers that would be able to get to the mainland of Japan and bomb Japan without having to be refueled. So it would be a much faster bombing action in that case. Was it really worth it? You're looking at over 20,000 casualties on the part of primarily the Marines, some Navy, of course, as well, on this island. And it was actually, in some cases, the bloodiest fighting in the history of the Marine Corps. And so there was, again, some debate whether or not it was really responsible. But from the Navy's perspective, wanted to have this operation, not only because it was important and strategically they would make that claim, but it was also going to be important bureaucratically or really politically for the Department of the Navy to be able to say that they have a large part in taking over the mainland of Japan by using this island to develop an airstrip to bomb the mainland of Japan. So we also see decision-making on the part of the bureaucracy. And here we're looking at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, and one of the decisions made that was a catastrophe and should not have been made the way it was. And you had then infighting within the bureaucratic organization. And some of you perhaps have read or watched YouTube clips of this terrible disaster, the explosion of the Challenger, the space shuttle Challenger, as you can see there in 1986. Now, what led to this was you had engineers that strongly protested the launching on this date because there had been an unusual cold spell in this part of Florida and had led to parts of the space shuttle being frozen, in particular what's called the O-ring. And now there was a concern that the O-ring, which is really a small piece of plastic, a small piece of rubber that would not be able to expand and be flexible like it was intended, and could lead to some problems for the machinery on board the space shuttle. These individuals were overruled by those directly responsible for the launch date that did not want to push it back, which would suggest then that NASA was incapable of making a strong decision and would perhaps harm its funding in the future. We can look back on that and say that's very ironic, because it certainly hurt some of the support and funding for NASA after the explosion. But so that was a case where you had people within the bureaucratic organization not agreeing on how to make this decision. And add on to just the overall horror of this case, if you've read anything about it, there's all kinds of indications that the crew members on board the Challenger survived this explosion. They died on the way down. So, and on the impact. It's a tragedy that's in many ways very hard to comprehend. And what led to the tragedy was the inability of the people within the bureaucratic organization to agree. So again, looking at power and responsibilities of the bureaucracy. And here we can see just the overall, again, power of some bureaucratic organizations. Is it possible that there could be an agency that's actually more secretive than the CIA? Yes, there is. It is possible, and this is it. This is the National Security Agency. The NSA is an incredibly secretive organization. As we can see here, reviewing billions of emails, phone calls, and other communications. And of course, we've covered to some degree the use of NSA throughout this class when we've talked about Edward Snowden, for example. So is this a responsibility that should be carried out? Well, from the NSA's perspective, you can say that what they're trying to do is stop hacking into areas such as stock markets and electronic grids, other areas, that hospitals, that could really shut down these organizations and really cause a lot of trauma for people, a lot of chaos. On the other hand, they're doing this, at least that was Snowden's argument, without search warrants and without probable cause, and just reviewing almost everyone's emails in this case. So it's a very powerful organization, very secretive organization. And you're reminded of that just driving down the road between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. You'll see the turnoff to the NSA, but you can see the sign there, who's supposed to be going down this road. And to get a sense of how secretive it is and powerful, if you're not authorized, you should not go down that road. And there have been cases of people who have been shot driving down this road, whether that was unintentional or that there was some nefarious plan. As far as the security is concerned, that's not something that they try to evaluate. And you go beyond a certain point, people are shot. So it's a very secretive group, a very powerful group. Is it a necessary group? Is it a necessary bureaucratic organization? I think that's increasingly, of course, what the people collectively in some way have to ultimately decide. Now, when decisions are made to be involved in military and foreign affairs, there can be good things happen, and there can be also some bad things. And that's what we'll come back to in just a moment here. Before we do that, again, just reminded about the battle of bureaucracies and how that can occur. A lot of times we may not really think of bureaucracy. We think of legislators or our county representatives or our city councils. And of course, all that's good, or our U.S. representative, U.S. senator, and of course the president. But what about people working for bureaucratic agencies and the policies that they make? So in this case, you're looking at two conflicting bureaucratic organizations that can have an impact in local affairs, especially right here, just a few miles from what really about a mile from where I'm recording this. You can see the issues involving Tar Creek. And so Tar Creek is a creek that runs just 100 yards or so from the main part of the campus here at NEO A&M. Tar Creek runs into the Neosho River, and then that runs into eventually Grand Lake. So one of the big issues is that if the lake gets too much water and it's not a way to take in more water and it pushes back the water, a backwater effect, you can now start to have flooding here in the city of Miami. So what Miami would like to see happen is that Grand Lake would get deeper, would allow for more water. So you would be able to, let me backtrack on that, that it would be a case in which you would be able to get the water out of Grand Lake faster. That's the better, more accurate way to say that. So as you can see there on the second bullet point, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they want to keep the depth levels as they are. So then the water, once it gets in, would be able to move on out and send it on down to other channels. But the state also getting support for Grand Lake and the people around it that want a deeper Grand Lake. They would like then to have more water in Grand Lake, which increases the possibility of a backwater effect. So the issue there is, and I know I wasn't really clear at the first part, the issue is to try to get more water out of Grand Lake faster and prevent then a backwater effect here in Miami. But that's not something that both sides agree. And we can see here that they're leads to some conflict between a state bureaucracy and a federal bureaucracy. Now, on the issue of what happens in dealing with military and foreign affairs, just share with you a couple of issues here on an audit, an attempt of an audit in 2014 for the Pentagon. And is it a situation where we have so much invested in our foreign and military affairs that it's almost beyond, it really in a way is right now beyond a control. It's not effectively being controlled. So here, just give you a couple of some facts here. You know, the Department of Defense could not pass an audit. You can see an idea, get an idea of just how powerful and how large the Department of Defense is. How much money we are spending on Department of Defense, over $700 billion a year at this point. In budget politics and what we consider bureaucratic decision making, you have what's called a boondoggle, and it's an outrageous spending plan. It just continues to go in ways in which we can't really understand. So, for example, and another feature here is what's referred to as the camel's nose in the tent. So the idea is once you get the camel's nose in the tent, eventually the whole camel will be in the tent. So for example, look at that first bullet point, $43 million for a natural gas station in Afghanistan. Well, it was supposed to originally cost only $500,000. So then you see this issue that when it comes to budgetary decision making, once the money's been spent, don't you just keep on spending more money because you've already spent the money, right? You've already spent some money, and you can say, well, this is a cost override. Well, yeah, it is, but you want something for this, don't you? You've already spent this money. So you can imagine once it got to a point, you go, well, we've already spent $10 million on this gas station. So we've got to spend more because we've already invested that money. And so, you know, when do you finally pull the plug, right? And so that's been the issue, of course, with Afghanistan and for Iraq. And at a point where, as you can see in the last bullet point here, you got $9 billion that no one really knows where it went when it comes to Iraq. And this leads us then to question for chat. Are you supportive of maintaining such a large military security bureaucratic state? Or would you want to see a decrease in this investment? And, you know, so this whole discussion here today has not really dealt with any specific part of what you could say for a test, let's say. It's just given us overall a feeling about the size of the bureaucratic state. But really, having this election, of course, and seeing the outcome of this election, we can see a broader sense of what the election is all about. What kind of country are you wanting to have? So do you want one that continues to maintain this large military, security, bureaucratic state? Or would you want to see a decrease in this investment? Big question. And let's see if we can get some responses there. Okay, very good. Our next recording will be more focused on the meaning of bureaucracy and the definitions of bureaucracy.